The word war generally implies violence. War without killing? Sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? Could such a thing even exist? In 2022, I'm not so sure, but in the 1950s, the United States attempted such a thing. A worthy cause, right? Well, save your applause because the case we're going to be investigating today will shock you. You most likely won't find this information in any of our history books. It's dark and its ethics are questionable. There are those that would prefer this story not be told. Because from 1955 to 1975, the U.S. Army conducted secret human experiments with mind-altering drugs. The test subjects? Nearly 7,000 of our own soldiers. Don't go anywhere because today's video is meant to inform and educate you on what really happened at Edgewood Arsenal. But first, let me welcome you to today's investigation. My name is Brooke and this is Armchair Investigator. Thank you so much for joining me as we take a deep dive into the Edgewood experiments. Edgewood Arsenal has been America's research center for chemical warfare for over a century. It was built during the end of the First World War to study and weaponize chlorine and mustard gas. It initially covered over 8,000 acres, had 4 plants, 585 buildings, housing for 8,500 workers and soldiers, a chemical laboratory, a hospital with over 250 beds, plus access to railways. Some of the most lethal chemical agents the world has ever known were created, tested, and manufactured here. In a 1918 article, The Sun touted it as the largest poison gas factory on Earth. After World War I, the government decided Edgewood was too valuable to abandon. So, after World War II, Edgewood Arsenal began research into new types of non-lethal agents. The mission at Edgewood was to find a drug that would produce incapacitation and decrease the enemy's ability to perform without killing them. In 1951, they would attempt to develop an incapacitating psychochemical that would produce temporary paralysis. At the same time, there was a revolution in pharmacology for treating psychiatric disorders. The Army Chemical Center got involved to see if the negative side effects from the drugs, the very thing that makes them unsuitable, could make a useful weapon. Dark territory. We're talking about weaponizing mind-altering drugs. They were looking for chemical compounds that produce things like anxiety, hallucinations, and psychosis. They tested as many different chemicals as they possibly could with animals to see which ones were most effective. In laboratory experiments, they used cats and mice as test subjects by placing a cat inside a box with a mouse. Naturally, cats display a hunter instinct towards mice, but what they discovered was that when the cat was exposed to LSD in aerosol form, meaning they breathed it in, the cat was no longer interested in catching the mouse. In fact, it appeared afraid of it. Testing on animals would only get the researchers so far, however. They needed to know what the experience of these drugs were like for humans. The issue of the use of human volunteers was considered by the AFMPC during the early 1950s. The council concluded that essential data could not be obtained unless human volunteers were used, and the use of humans in medical research was authorized. The human experimentation program became known as Operation Delirium. That takes us to 1955, when Edgewood rolled out their Army Medical Volunteer Research Program. Recruiting teams visited Army installations where they advertised to soldiers about a temporary duty project for medical research volunteers.
The Army Chemical Center at Edgewood, Maryland. Here are employed hundreds of qualified scientists, men and women in and out of uniform, with many more that number of technicians and skilled workers. In well-equipped scientific laboratories, highly competent scientists and engineers explore many important lines of inquiry. Their primary purpose, to cope successfully with chemical warfare. And coping with chemical warfare means coping with chemical agents. substances employed in chemical warfare for tactical purposes, as well as the munitions which can disseminate them.
Anywhere from 10 to 20% of the audience expressed interest, and then these men were asked to complete personal history questionnaires. They told soldiers they would be testing Army equipment, things like gas masks and other protective clothing. It was enticing to soldiers because they would be given $1.50 a day, no kitchen patrol or guard duty, and they would get most weekends off. And because Edgewood didn't have the appearance of a typical military base, soldiers liked that. To them, it was like hitting the jackpot. For 1 to 2 months, they would be testing out equipment with weekends off. When volunteers reported for duty, they were told there was a slight program change, and that there was going to be a group that would be testing other non-lethal combat material. Okay, we're here. Might as well do it. Days consisted of formation in the morning, followed by breakfast. A bulletin board in the rec room would contain the name of soldiers and where they were to report for the day. The concept of non-lethal weapons meant developing things that wouldn't be fatal, and psychochemicals had potential for a more humane approach to warfare. So, what was the ideal non-lethal agent? This required a lot of trial and error of over 250 different chemical agents. Marijuana was first tested in trials. It produced a woozy state. PCP was also tested and then discarded as too dangerous in terms of its effect on behavior. Then they moved to LSD. LSD was promising, but it didn't cause a total inability to function. What research found was that under pressure, many individuals could still pull themselves together enough to perform. Then BZ was developed. It was more active and had longer-lasting effects than LSD. It worked by blocking acetylcholine, which is the principal drug that controls behavior. Within 2 to 3 hours of taking BZ, volunteers would show all the features of toxic delirium, which can produce psychosis lasting several days. A typical incapacitating dose of BZ caused a slew of effects: scattered function, thinking, and altered perception, to name a few. Listen to this. A single dose of less than 1 milligram could produce delirium lasting several days. To put that into perspective, it's been said that 1 milligram weighs as much as a grain of salt or a grain of sand. Yikes. BZ has a slow onset and a long duration of action. It was perfect. It would become the chemical of choice at Edgewood. When BZ studies began in 1960, researchers needed a psychiatrist with biologic training, and one was assigned to the program in January of 1961. They would go on to recruit physicians trained in internal medicine, anesthesiology, cardiology, surgery, dermatology, ophthalmology, neurology, whatever specialty the program needed. So, what is BZ? It's a stable white crystalline powder that's only slightly water-soluble. It's odorless and non-irritating. It was first discovered by Hoffman-LaRoche in 1951 while researching an agent that would stop muscle spasms in order to help treat gastrointestinal conditions. Back then, they were calling it 3-QNB, not to be confused with 3-CPO. I digress. Soon after, the U.S. Army starts investigating it and calls it BZ. They describe it as a central nervous system depressant. It can disrupt memory, problem solving, attention, and comprehension. Mild effects are felt within 1 hour and full effects felt within 4, lasting anywhere from 24 to 48 hours. Sometimes longer. No, I don't think so. And get this, it's been known to last 96 hours. Now, before you think about volunteering, listen to this. The first onset of symptoms include dizziness, a loss of motor control, vomiting, dry mouth, blurred vision, and confusion. From there, things go from bad to worse. Effects progress to random and unpredictable behavior with delusions and hallucinations. It sends the subject into a state of delirium. It causes the person to jolt from one reality to the next, and the illusions are extremely vivid. The person is in the moment and not even aware that a drug experience is occurring. Animals might appear, disappear. They might see miniature people. They might think that they're smoking a cigarette or eating a ham sandwich when they have a shoe in their hands. Patients are also highly prone to suggestion. When large groups are affected, it can cause shared hallucinations and create mass hysteria. Psychological after effects can show up for up to 3 weeks after initial recovery. If you're wondering, there's no street drugs that are similar to BZ. Because it causes delirium and lasts for so long, people would not choose to recreationally take it. Now, there's an antidote that can be used to alleviate the effects of BZ. It's called physostigmine. But, and this comes with a big caveat, it's most effective when taken after 4 hours from the time of exposure, and a single dose only lasts an hour, which means it's going to require frequent redosing injections. No, as somebody who does not like needles, I cannot even imagine having to get an injection every hour. That's where I draw the line. No. I'm going home. In 1962, Dr. James Ketchum, an Army psychiatrist, was assigned to Edgewood Arsenal as a research director to spearhead the human testing of psychochemicals. He really believed that delirium-inducing drugs could be effective weapons on the battlefield. Again, you could argue it was a worthy cause, one that would stop killing. In theory, it would work by releasing chemicals behind enemy lines. Then, 12 to 24 hours later, soldiers would go in and gather the opposing side. Our soldiers aren't being killed, and neither is the rival side. But, fueled by Cold War paranoia and the thought that Russia's own psychochemical program was outpacing America, research may have been moving quicker than it should have, possibly violating medical ethics and disregarding potential dangers these drugs had on the volunteer soldiers. And Dr. Ketchum really believed Russia was way ahead of us in chemical warfare development. Because they had millions of dollars to work with and volunteers at the ready, they were able to put together an elaborate series of testing. Out of the nearly 300 test subjects BZ was used on, 20 would be chosen for higher dosing, giving a more intense effect. Soldiers would be exposed to chemical compounds and then asked a series of questions. How do you feel? Are the effects increasing, decreasing, or staying the same? What day is it? They would be asked to do simple subtraction problems. Exposure to these compounds were administered in a number of ways: IV, intramuscular, inhalation, oral, and transdermal. In 1963, researchers at Edgewood moved to the next phase: BZ mock combat scenarios. They wanted to demonstrate how BZ could render a unit ineffective. To do this, they created a fake communications outpost that was entirely self-sufficient. There was enough food, clothing, toiletries, and medicine for 4 men to stay there for 3 days. Out of the 4 soldiers, 1 was given a placebo and 1 was given a high incapacitating dose. Cameras were installed and doctors gave them messages to interpret, codes to solve, and other fake scenarios. 1 was given a placebo effect because doctors needed somebody there that was, quote-unquote, in their right mind.
Within an hour, Carpenter's hands will feel cold, his face hot. Borderline hallucinations will come late in the experiment. The medium dose received by Private Hannon made him careless, but he worked with Sergeant Hall to maintain the situation map so that it reflected information from incoming messages.
Delta 1, this is Alpha 1. It is now 1232 hours. Set your clock to conform. Over. 12:32.
The peak of the compound's physical effects was reached within 4 to 6 hours. The peak of mental incapacitation several hours later, when a simulated chemical alarm sounded. Inability to put on his protective mask demonstrated that the full dose recipient, Sadrozny, was totally ineffective as a team member. The team, therefore, had suffered 25% total casualties plus. Private Hannon also was a minus factor for 6.5 hours Friday. Hannon made numerous mistakes through Sunday without correcting them, jeopardizing the team's mission. Carpenter, the low-dose recipient, was operational but substandard in efficiency. Carpenter remained on the fringe of the group activity throughout the test. For Zadrozny, the high-dose subject, the peak of mental incapacitation arrived about 9 hours after exposure to the agent. He remained awake, experiencing hallucinations for a total of 36 hours. Through the night, Zadrozny searched for an exit, even though more than 30 hours had elapsed since he last had a few hours' sleep. It is not uncommon for subjects exposed to this agent to go 1 or 2 days without sleep. Zadrozny spent the night searching, wandering, mumbling. At times, he attempted to take part in the team mission.
They give you a message? I'm waiting for it. No, put the, see if you can hear him. You can't hear him unless you have the telephone up there in your ear. Yeah, try it in. Put the telephone to your head so you can hear him when he gives you.
Meanwhile, from another location, a soldier was trying to contact the Delta 1 team with a message to be relayed.
Delta 1. This is Bravo 1.
Finally, having received the message, Zadrozny tried to relay it.
Alpha 1, this is Delta 1. Message from Bravo 1 follows.
After 24 hours rest, the completely recovered volunteers reviewed their experience.
What was this business over here in the corner? You were lying down and looking at the wall.
Well, the pores in the wall seem to be, I was looking, and they seem to be two armies. On each side of one of the pieces of tape running down the wall, two armies converging.
I remember talking on the telephone, and I would get mixed up, but I didn't feel like correcting it, or I just felt like I couldn't do anything about it.
Zadrozny, who had received the heaviest dosage, remembered when the drug effects were receding.
Zadrozny, when do you think you would have been able to resume normal function? I think at about 2 in the morning, 2 o'clock Monday morning.
About 2.5 days.
Zadrozny was asked if he remembered why he had shown annoyance at efforts to help him. He was able to recall a feeling of resentment.
I wanted to get up by myself to prove to me that I could do it.
Did you feel that you didn't need all this help, or?
Yes, I did.
Do you think that was true now looking back at it?
No, I don't think it was true. I think I needed all the help that I got.
The soldier who had received the highest dose remained awake and hallucinating for 36 hours. Awake and hallucinating for 36 hours. Can you imagine? Not my idea of a long weekend. In 1964, researchers would begin open-air testing. How would BZ perform outside of a clinical setting in open battlefield conditions? A large-scale test was scheduled at Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah. Test subjects were put on a flatbed truck and driven around inside BZ smoke. After exposure, volunteers were brought by helicopter from Dugway Proving Ground to a medical unit to be watched and studied. Each hour they would be examined by a doctor. 8 different tasks were set up. They would have to carry out patrol duties against an opposing patrol that were not given drugs. It was a week-long experiment, and the results were enough to convince generals to move forward. BZ became standardized as a chemical weapon. The United States acquired 100,000 pounds of it and weaponized it into a series of thermal munitions. It was never used in battle that we know of. That's because in late 1975, the Human Research Program and its experiments were abruptly terminated, and the United States declares complete destruction of its BZ stockpile by 1989. There was too much talk about what was really going on at Edgewood, causing them to pull the plug on the program completely. The servicemen that volunteered were sworn to secrecy and told to never discuss Edgewood Arsenal with anyone. This was no joke. The volunteers were all under a strict secrecy oath for 50 years after the program ended. And while consent forms were given to the service members, it's debatable if they were fully informed about the experiments they were participating in. Many of the soldiers felt they were misinformed about the nature of the experiments they signed up for, saying they were never told about the adverse or possible long-term effects the drugs would have on them. Dr. Ketchum, who was head of research at Edgewood Arsenal for over 10 years, didn't believe that anyone was hurt, arguing that what the volunteers went through was no different than a dream, saying most of the volunteers didn't even remember what had happened to them while they were under the influence. In his eyes, they were in line with the standard operating procedures of a classified program. They gave volunteers all the information they could, but couldn't tell them what drugs they were given since it was a military secret. And as far as he was concerned, they couldn't predict the effects. Bob Crafty, a volunteer at Edgewood, described some of his time there. "I felt weak, dizzy. They tested us day and night, woke us up during the night taking blood pressure, asking about what sensations we were feeling." By the time he reached his mid-20s, his hands shook so badly he couldn't do simple tasks. He later developed other health problems, including prostate cancer and symptoms of PTSD. In fact, many servicemen suffered from a range of adverse health effects following their time at Edgewood, including peeling skin, cancer, movement disorders, and psychological issues. Some are still plagued by night terrors, hallucinations, and intrusive thoughts.
I have breathing problems, I have nightmares, and did I still remember and think about the test?
There were some who weren't able to cope at all and would end up ending their time here on Earth. Dr. Ketchum went to his deathbed still believing nobody was hurt. He died on May 27, 2019. Besides the secrecy oath, the U.S. Army was shielded from any repercussions or lawsuits by the Ferris Doctrine, a 1950 Supreme Court ruling that prohibits soldiers from taking any kind of legal action against the military. The court ruled that the military could subject its people to all sorts of mistreatment, including death, and enjoy broad immunity. They could do almost whatever they wanted, and any damages would be considered incident to service. Breaking the secrecy oath meant the volunteers would be looking at judicial punishment and up to 20 years in Leavenworth Prison. Volunteers were supposed to be called back for checkups, but that never happened. The secrecy oath also meant they couldn't talk to their private doctors, meaning they couldn't file any medical claims. In 2006, volunteers received letters releasing them from part of their oath. A step forward, right? Well, wrong. They still couldn't discuss anything relating to operational information that included chemical or biological warfare capabilities, meaning they still couldn't say anything. It was the ultimate catch-22. Breaking their oath after all these years would mean they'd be dishonorably discharged and lose their pension plans. So frustrating to not even be able to get medical treatment. Have you heard about this? What are your thoughts? I know that I've given you a lot to unpack today, and to be honest, this is only breaking the surface. There is so much here. There is a part of me that can understand needing to test things on people. I can also understand the need for secrecy. I absolutely feel like there should have been some type of clause in their consent forms that stated, no matter what, no matter when, these servicemen would have been able to go and get medical treatment whenever, for whatever, and not make them jump through all these hoops. I don't know, and the thing about this is it wasn't even that long ago. I am so saddened by these soldiers and what they had to go through, and they were so young. It just goes to prove that there is so much here that goes on that we wouldn't even think or dream of happening. As always, I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts? If you liked today's video, give it a thumbs up, and hey, while you're at it, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss out on the next investigation.